4.8 million people didn't vote because they were either in Crimea or in the eastern parts of the country. Poroshenko, who comes from the place where they traditionally are more sort of pro-Western, did vote by a landslide. Proof now is of the pudding is now in the eating, because there's so much reform, so much economic reform, land reform and all sorts of reforms that need to happen. Ukraine was, even before the trouble, was not a happy place. It's a very corrupt place. It's a very sort of entrenched business elite. So he has his work cut out for him, and he needs to come to a conclusion with Russia, because we're getting into winter, and whereas the Germans with the South Stream pipeline that gives them gas directly are not affected, those countries in southeastern Europe, the Bosnia-Herzegovinas of this world, the Slovenias of this world, they really depend on that pipeline from Russia through the Ukraine. A city like Sarajevo.
From your vantage point, if you were doing business in that area, or specifically in Ukraine, would you go into that negotiation, that process, and go, wow, this is going to be such good business, so productive? Or would you be thinking, oh, right, okay, we've got to recalibrate how we do what we do?
No, I would look and see what happens, because the Ukraine has been going through tremendous strife. So I would look what happens. I would look what happens with Russia, whether one can come to an agreement or not. I would look what happens in the winter, how the gas will flow through the Ukraine in winter. And I would certainly look at how he deals with the economic reforms. Will he do land reform? Will he do all the things that he needs to do?
Many people still describe the economy there not as an economy at all, but as an oligarchy. I mean,
Absolutely.
You mentioned the issue of corruption. We sort of can't underplay that there.
Absolutely. So if he can't address those issues, I'd be very careful in investing there.
Just quickly, the picture on the front of Frankfurter Allgemeine, that's one that Poroshenko himself actually tweeted yesterday during the election process, and it's quite interesting to what degree he's been harnessing social media throughout this campaign as well, isn't it?
And also it's interesting that he's wearing sort of a camouflage suit, so showing we're at war,
Well, he'd come from Donetsk, I think, prior to that.
Yeah, but I'm sure that was well choreographed, and he did think of what he was wearing when he was casting that vote.
Okay, front page of the FT. Italy comes under pressure after 9 banks fail the ECB stress test. Some of the weakest banks, the paper says, moving from hospital to rehab. Do we buy that?
Yes, we absolutely buy that, because when you look at it, you had about 25 banks that were in trouble. The stress test was made at the end of last year, 2013, and in between then about $70 billion of capital was raised. So 14 banks are now, 10 banks are out of the hospital, and it's only 14 banks who are still in rehab. So yes, except for Monte dei Paschi in Italy, where probably all is lost, they're working towards getting better.
And Italy claiming that some of these stress tests were unrealistically harsh on their banks. And of course, the whole point of these stress tests was to try to shore up, well, not only to shore up real assets and cash within the banks, but also to restore trust in Europe's banks. And I wonder if that's been achieved.
I think that's been achieved. And the one thing that I find is really important that sort of doesn't get reported that often, they also had the asset quality review. And this is the first time that the ECB really measures all the loan portfolios. For the first time, we are measuring, apples with apples, we're comparing, and oranges with oranges. Before that, we went with the domestic central bank views on the loan portfolios. So now there is a united standard throughout the Eurozone, which is probably a very good and a very important thing.
But arguably, buying or selling money at the moment has never been cheaper. That's what banks like Goldman Sachs have been saying just in the past couple of weeks. But if you're a fund manager, you're going to get the email or the phone call today, aren't you? Because governments have said, presidents and the Irish government said it over the weekend, we will not bail out again the banks that have come close to or have failed these stress tests. So government's not going to do it. So sovereign funds are going to have to come up with all this money quite quickly within the next 2 weeks.
Well, they have to. It's not sovereign funds. I mean, these banks will have to quite quickly find a way. But, they can have rights issues. There's a lot of things they can do. And I think they're well underway. And the ECB has been working with all of them for the last 10 months.
Look at the same paper. but in the companies and market sections. Startups, tech startups, they don't always hail from Silicon Valley, according to this. But the other thing I like about this article is that we learn what the definition of a unicorn is, because I thought it was a horse with a sort of thing on its head, but it's not, is it?
So did I. But I mean, it's not great or surprising. Look at the biggest ever sort of public offering, which was Alibaba, which is a Chinese tech company. Obviously, where there is growth, there's going to be tech companies. So you have some 60% are from Silicon Valley, 40% are not from Silicon Valley. But the interesting thing in here as well is that once they reach that 1 billion level, it's the big Silicon Valley companies that buy them up. So Silicon Valley still keeps that power to it.
And also, we're not talking about the dying days of people like Google and Microsoft, because they're still in there. They still have a very good mechanism to buy up the startups.
Exactly, that's exactly what they're doing.
A little bit of kit or technology or a way of doing it that they like, Google and Microsoft just go in there and go, here's a deal, just sign on the dotted line.
And you know, the interesting thing is, which is an accounting thing, about 10 years ago, accounting rules were changed, and now you can capitalize anything that was spent on research, which makes it highly attractive for the big Googles to buy up these companies, and then they can capitalize all they spent on research of getting there.
China's slowing down. Is that a worry? According to the business section of the China Daily.
It is a worry. I mean, China is slowing down. It's still 7.3% growth.
Still pretty good growth rates.
But mind you, for China, you basically say if 5% is sort of at naught, because they still have to get a lot of people out of poverty. Yes, and what really should worry the Europeans, or especially the Germans, is that there's a fixed asset investment, so capital goods investments gone down. They're moving increasingly from being an investor-led growth to a consumption-led growth, which in the long run for sustainability is good. But if you're Germany and you want to sell equipment, that's not terribly good for you.
Because the knock-on effect might be, the third economic recession for Germany? Because
yes, exactly.
The way that those massive economies just click together.
And mind you, it also has ramifications for us in Europe, whereas we trade less with China, let's say, than Germany. But our largest trading partner, about more than 60%, is the EU. So if the EU as a whole shrinks, that doesn't help us. Germany catches a cold, Germany catches a flu, all of us in Europe can go and invest in cold medicine. Okay,
front page of the Japan Times, cash better than blankets for refugees.
That's counterintuitive, but they said, you give, they looked especially at Lebanon and Syria, which are Syrians in Lebanon. Lebanon is a reasonably functioning economy, so that probably works. I'm not sure it would work in Darfur, where you first need to get the blankets there. So I think this probably holds true for some places. It may not hold true for other places, which, where you have huge masses of people coming into hugely deprived economies.
Okay, very quickly, Wales toasts 100 years of Dylan Thomas, who womanizing stories were probably, some of them were made up. Not that men do that, of course.
No, but I think, who cares about his lifestyle? He wrote some magnificent poetry, and he was named the James Joyce of Wales. So he is just really a towering poetic figure.